Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary, Bloody... Wait, I'm sorry. It's just that the history of this story has been so long and complicated that it's kind of hard to get into without sounding like I'm trying to advertise something. Anyway, let's talk about Bloody Mary. Now I know what you all want to hear. You want to hear about a lady in a Victorian nightgown with dripping black hair standing in front of the mirror saying, "Look at me, I'm scary." But unfortunately, even though that image is one of the most common depictions of her in modern media, we don't have much evidence of that actually being part of the original legend. The earliest written account we have of any kind of Bloody Mary legend comes from an 18th century book called The History of Mary I, Queen of Scots, and Bloody Mary may or may not have come from that. As a matter of fact, historians generally agree that there are two separate Mary figures whose stories have become intertwined over time, those being Mary I of England and Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley. Mary I came to power after the death of her brother, King Edward VI, who had no children. And she was both loved and hated during her reign because she tried to bring England back to Catholicism. She'd been raised Protestant, but she converted to Catholicism later in life, which was very unpopular among the English people at the time. She was also only queen for 5 years from 1553 to 1558, which may explain why she is the subject of so many ghost stories considering that in folklore. A monarch not having a long reign often means that they died before their time and have unfinished business. If you want to see Mary I as a ghastly specter haunting the halls of Hampton Court Palace, well, that can be traced back to an 1820 pamphlet called The Ghost of Mary Queen of Scots, which tells the story of a man who moved into Hampton Court and brought his wife and daughter with him. One night, he heard chains dragging metal moans and turned on his bed to see the ghost of Mary I dragging herself closer and closer. Well now, supposedly the apparition stopped right by his bed and beckoned to him with a finger before vanishing altogether. Supposedly this happened 3 nights in a row, and then the ghost showed up during the day too, and started moving paintings around until finally it walked right through the wall. Nobody ever saw the ghost again, but a chill went down the man's spine every time he passed that particular wall. While Mary I is the Bloody Mary everyone usually thinks of, Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley wrote Frankenstein and died young, and some believe that her death inspired the creation of the Bloody Mary mythos. Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley died in 1851 at the age of 53, and the first published story that includes the Bloody Mary legend comes from 1854. That story, which is called The Ghost and the Grotesque, was published anonymously, and all we know about it is that it was printed in the dark, which was a collection of supernatural stories. In this tale, there is a young woman named Mary who lives with her sister and friends. They have a lot of fun dancing and laughing until one day Mary's health suddenly begins to fail. No matter how much the family does to cheer her up, she just becomes more and more withdrawn. Then one night after going to sleep, she gets up and walks out of the house. Her family goes looking for her, but they can't find her anywhere. In the morning, however, they see that she has returned home and is sitting in her chair just as though nothing had happened. This continues for several days until one night while Mary is away from the house, her family hears a knock. When they open the door, they see that Mary is standing there covered in blood. She crawls inside and tells them that she's dying, then climbs into bed and closes her eyes forever. After she dies, her family examines the bed and sees that her body is covered in blood. Then suddenly she sits up again and kills them all. Gotcha. Just kidding. Or am I? This is the first story that puts the Bloody Mary legend and the whole phrase "beware the night" together. And these two things have been practically inseparable ever since. But the story doesn't end there. The narrator of the story says that his friend, whom we assume is Mary, was driven insane by hearing a voice say, "Beware the night" every night. Well, perhaps the voice warned her of the dangers that awaited her after dark, or maybe it was just a malevolent spirit enjoying its own amusement. The story never explicitly says, but it does say that Mary went crazy and attacked her family. This version of the story has a lot in common with the lore surrounding Bloody Mary. However, it's unclear whether or not Mary was intended to be Bloody Mary. When researching the Bloody legends, I came across multiple places that claimed this was the first appearance of the Bloody Mary story, but none of them cited any sources. And when I went looking for sources, they all pointed me back here. So ultimately, I have no idea where they got that information. However, there is another source out there that claims the first Bloody Mary's story was actually published in 1908 in the New York World newspaper. This one involves a woman who goes to visit her aunt and uncle, and while she's there, she learns that her uncle drowned years ago. He died in such a horrible way that his body had to be cut into pieces and sewn back together. The woman is staying in the spare bedroom where her uncle died when she hears the sound of chains, dragging one night and sees the specter of a man being dragged toward her. When she screams, the ghost disappears, but it keeps coming back every night, and sometimes it even comes during the day. Finally, the ghost appears one last time, reaches out, and instead of saying anything, looks directly at the woman, smiles and winks, then vanishes. I personally think that this one is the best candidate for the first Bloody Mary story because it contains elements that are often found in ghost stories like the old building and the main character staying in the room where someone died. And also, the ghost in this one is far more developed than the one in The Ghost and The Grotesque. We can tell why it's haunting the house, how it died, and it even has a personality. Sure, it winks, but at least it does something besides moan and drag itself closer and closer. Anyway, regardless of which story you consider to be the first true Bloody Mary story, if any of them are, both were published within 50 years of each other, and they both share a few similarities. Both take place in old houses. Both protagonists are women. Both ghosts appear gradually, getting worse over time, and both stories were published in the Victorian era. So what does all of this mean? Does it mean that Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley and Mary are somehow connected? Well, not necessarily. These stories could have just been inspired by the general dislike people felt towards both of these women for different reasons. People didn't like Mary because she wanted to turn England back Catholic, and they didn't like Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley because she wrote Frankenstein and people thought that was gross. But if you're still wondering about the connection between the two Marys, there's one last theory I'd like to explore. This is going to require us to go to the home of the modern Bloody Mary legend. So grab your ghost peppers and holy water and get ready to learn about how Bloody Mary became the Bloody Mary. Bloody Mary's story is thought to have really taken off in the early 1970s, thanks in large part to a woman named Susan Hell in 1971. She wrote a story called The Ghost in the Mirror for Reader's Digest, and it's widely considered to be the definitive Bloody Mary tale. The story follows a young girl who goes to stay with her aunt and uncle and their strange friend Miss Mary, who insists on wearing gloves even in the house and spends a lot of time staring directly at her reflection in the mirror. It's rumored that the character of Bloody Mary was partially inspired by Hill's mother, who died when Hill was young. And while Hill never outright confirmed this, she did say that her mother died mysteriously. And according to Hill's half-sister, Hill used to tell her that she was going to write a story about her mother. Now, if you think that might be where the Mary connection comes in, you're absolutely correct. The house in The Ghost in the Mirror is haunted by a former maid named Mary, who killed her mistress and then hung herself. And when the protagonist learns this, she realizes that the friend of her aunt and uncle is that same Mary. The story concludes with Mary saying that she will now claim the lives of her new victims, and then the lights go out and the protagonist never sees her again. There are dozens of other tales out there with characters named Bloody Mary, but most of them follow a similar formula. The main character hears the name Bloody Mary spoken by another character or reads it somewhere. And soon after, they begin to experience terrifying events that seem to be caused by a vengeful ghost. And there are plenty of inconsistencies in these stories. Sometimes Bloody Mary is a ghost who haunts mirrors. Other times she's a creature that lives under beds or in closets. Sometimes she killed her victims, and other times she just drove them insane. There are even stories where Bloody Mary isn't a ghost at all, but rather a witch who grants wishes in exchange for sacrifices. Ultimately, Bloody Mary is whatever the person telling the story wants her to be, and that's probably why the lore surrounding her has survived for so long. People love the idea of an evil spirit lurking just beyond their vision, waiting for them to turn their backs so she can attack. And even though the details change depending on who's telling the story, that core element has remained constant. And with that, I've reached the end of my investigation into Bloody Mary. If you liked this video and would like to see more topics covered in depth, please let me know by hitting that thumbs up button. And as always, thank you for watching.